Hello and welcome to episode 4 of After This. My name is Daniel.
I'm Carla.
And I'm Shannon.
And on episode 4 we're going to get into probably going to be the biggest topic we've tackled so far, I think, which is how might it pop up, unification of the human species, and what might it look like? And essentially, why are we doing all this? And what would be the reason for doing it in the end? Which I guess is the entire point of this podcast, essentially condensed into one episode. So we're probably not going to do anything justice, but we're going to touch on things and hopefully convey some idea of the overall picture.
Hey Daniel.
Yes, Shannon.
Why did the Marxists drink herbal tea?
Why?
Because he thought that proper tea was theft.
Oh. That was terrible, but I liked it. That was really good. That's a good way to start this. I like it. Alright. Oh, that was the right amount of bad. Alright, so the first point is the models for unified humankind are myriad and varied. But it wouldn't have to change dramatically from what we have in place at the moment. So the thing is, one thing I did, and it was for a submission to the new state, I think it was called. I'll have to add this in the description. The new state competition or something, where some Swedish billionaire was putting up $10 million for the person who came up with the best idea for how to better govern the planet. And I made a submission, but obviously we had these massive academic groups submitting and everything else. So I just thought I might be able to meet some people through it. But my idea essentially was very more or less based on the existing federal system. So essentially you have countries or regions, and I thought maybe it'd work better as regions instead of countries, that basically have representative government that all contribute to the overall global government. Mm-hmm. But instead of having a president, this is just my idea, it's just one option, but the thing is you can see that it doesn't have to change dramatically. And instead of having a president of the world, essentially what you could have is you could have a council of 3 people, and everything's done by majority. But the thing is that to vote people onto the council, the regions of the planet would basically all vote for someone else. So basically every region can, whatever region you live in, you can vote for a candidate for president on the presidential council, but it can't be from your own region. Okay. It has to be from someone else's. So the thing is, you'd have to have a lot of education about who from what region is going to do what. So the thing is, there might be a European, a North American, South American, Central American, that kind of thing. And then they'd all have their own elections and vote for each other, essentially, whichever section you wanted the most. So there'd be this constant thing of people trying to, sidle up to other regions, sort of thing. That was essentially the idea, is that you could just have a federal system the way that it works now, on that scale, with a constitution that basically guarantees human rights and, everything else, so that if the government comes in and says, we want to vote for all these crazy things, it says, well, these things aren't part of the constitution, so you can't do those. You can't do anything that contravenes human rights. Mm-hmm. So the thing is, if by some insane scenario you ended up with 3, hardcore radical Muslims that want to turn the whole world into a theocracy, which is again is a nightmare scenario that people bring up. It's not permissible by the constitution. There's certain things that would be unalterable, basically you can't put anything in that's going to contravene this set of basic rights. That is unalterable, essentially. So the thing is, you're always safe that no matter what insane person you end up with, by some chance, even though it's extremely unlikely, you have protections, essentially.
How does this constitution, who determines this constitution if it's unalterable?
Yeah, that's a tricky question, isn't it?
And I think one of the biggest kind of fears or questions that I have is, how does different cultures and different language in particular survive if you're having one governing body?
Yeah.
Does it necessarily, and also if you have things like open borders and a lot of cross education, do we still get to protect different cultures and different languages?
Yeah. No, I've thought about that before. I think, if I'm being honest, I don't think multiple languages would survive. I think what you'd end up with is, because a fundamental part of civilization, and it's part of the reason why when they founded Indonesia, they created the, what's it called again? It's the Common Indonesian tongue. It's basically it's called something. It's a mishmash of all these like Malay and Indo tongues, basically, that they basically created to be a common language so everyone could talk to each other. I can't remember the name of it anymore, but basically that is what I think would end up happening. Not so much, maybe not consciously, but I think you'd end up with a mishmash of human languages, and like you'd have pieces left, and you'd have documents that would say, this is what this language used to be, or this language. But I don't think, because the stance I take on culture and language in general is no culture should be greater than the life of the person.
Yeah.
So the thing is, if you're maintaining this division that is maintaining this massive amount of economic inequality and all these issues and abuse and everything that happens, all the exploitation that happens, if you can solve that, but you have to kind of cop the fact that all the economies and cultures are going to get intermixed, and they're all going to kind of dissolve a little bit, I'll happily accept that, because honestly, the thing is, I mean, what is human culture going to look like in 500 years? You know,
it always changes.
Like, you look at the year 3000, the thing is, none of the cultures are going to look the same.
No.
Like, whatever the culture is on Earth, if we're still existing, it's not going to be what it is now. And the thing is, so there's nothing really sacrosanct about culture.
Yeah, look, I find it, I cannot articulate why that seems like something that is sad and intrinsically bad, but it really does sound like a shame.
Here we go. Thank you, Shannon. It's Bahasa Indonesian. Okay, sorry. I was driving me crazy.
No, good to look it up. Yeah, I can't really articulate why that feels like such a sad thing, but it really does.
No, it is.
With language, it's a little bit. There's a lot of interesting research into the way that language affects psychology and affects the way that you think.
Absolutely.
So I think if you lose the variety of languages, you do necessarily lose some culture.
There is absolutely. No, it's one of those mixed things, isn't it? Where it's like it'd be a tragedy, but at the same time, I can't see an alternative.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, the way things get mixed and mixed, I mean, how many billions and billions of dialects of languages have we already lost in every country? Because every 10, 20 years, language changes, and it changes again and again and again, and like people and sections get exposed to other sections, and like what we see now as the English language and the French language, the German language, the thing is, all of those sections were like hundreds of or thousands of minor dialects.
Yeah.
But then as they started talking to each other, and as you started expanding communications and logistics and everything, they got more uniform.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's just the natural flow of things.
It might be inevitable.
Like, I think long term, it's just something we're probably going to end up with. I think what you might end up with, though, is you'd end up with, in the future, humankind might spread to the stars and go to other planets and things, and then that introduces a new level of isolation where new cultures will develop based on those planets, and then you might have it recreating itself kind of thing.
And I suppose we are at the point now where we have a lot of methods of recalling things, of storing information, so even if living cultures change dramatically and languages as well, we're going to have record of it.
Exactly, like it's not forgotten, it's just that, like, the human necessity, like, we like to see other cultures as, like we were saying in the last one, like, kind of like stereotypes sometimes. You sort of see, that culture wants that language, whatever the thing is. I think more than anything, people just want to live in a functioning society. They that is the predominant influence, that people want things to function well. And honestly, and I've thought about this before, because people have suggested to me that, like, what we should embrace is something like Esperanto, because Esperanto was developed to be a common tongue. Like, that's the whole purpose behind it, is it's meant to be easy to learn. But look, if I'm being completely honest, and I don't mind. I honestly don't care if we all had to speak Chinese.
Yeah.
I frankly don't care. The thing is, for me, it's more about having a common tongue.
I called it.
Called what?
That you want everyone to speak Chinese.
I forgot about that. Oh, that's true. Yeah, I prize more than anything having a functioning human society because what it means for us long term.
And I guess, possibly playing devil's advocate a little bit, but
yeah.
your definition of functioning doesn't necessarily meet the same definition for someone who's grown up under vastly different conditions in a vastly different culture.
I guess no, I've heard that before. I mean, what would you define as something that wouldn't fit?
That's a good question. Okay, so respect to elders.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in our culture, that is not so strong.
Yep.
And there's an idea that the elderly are kind of slowing down. We know that as you get really old, your thinking gets quite rigid and you stop being adaptable.
Yep.
These people are going to be dead soon, so they maybe shouldn't be in control of what's going to happen in the future. And we kind of place a lot more importance in the younger generation coming through.
Yeah, we do.
We
definitely
whereas
do.
there are other cultures that are much more reverent of I've got an example of this actually. So when I was in high school, a friend of mine who was, I think Taiwanese, told me this story about, there was this peasant family that was starving and they had a young baby and they had a grandmother. And the baby was breastfeeding, but the mother was feeding the breast milk to the grandmother instead of the baby, and the baby was starving and dying, and that was the correct thing to do, was to keep the grandmother alive. Whereas to someone who's grown up in Australia, that just sounds abhorrent.
Of course it does.
So that's one example that I can think of.
No, absolutely. So the thing is, and this is the thing I have with all cultural points, is even if the thing is you're well, I'm going to lose the ability for my town to play baseball, I'm going to lose this thing that's not going to be prevalent anymore. The thing is, you individually and you as your family unit or whatever it is can still do whatever you want to do. Yeah. The thing is, culture is almost like a self-sorting process. It's if you as a group of people want to keep doing something the way you're doing it, as long as it's not illegal, then sure, absolutely. The thing is, as long as you're not killing someone or you're not doing, like I said, you're not contravening the human rights laws, then you can do whatever you want. The thing is, if you want to keep doing baseball or you want to keep, venerating your elders over young people or whatever it is, there's nothing to stop you. Culture may naturally get to the point where, you have, movies and TV shows and stuff and everything else saying you should be this way kind of thing. But that's just, that's culture being culture. You can form an alternate culture if you wanted to.
There's always subcultures.
Exactly, there's always subcultures. And really, I think that's the discrepancy. I think people start to conflate the jurisdictional world and the institutional world of government with cultural reinforcement.
Yeah.
And so the thing is, cultures do blend, but it's kind of like a natural sorting where people are look at these things around me, I like that and that and that. I'm going to stop doing this because it's not fun compared to that. And start doing that.
And I do quite like that. I like multiple cultures coming together and taking the best bits from each one. But there's something that I can't articulate that seems...
It's like you're losing some unique version of the human image. I think the thing is...
That's a good way of putting it.
More cultures are always going to appear.
Yeah.
The thing is, what's going to happen is the culture might change, the language might change, but the thing is, new cultures will come out of that new culture. And circumstances changing cause new people, because people always naturally form these mini communities.
Yeah.
They love doing it and they love creating their own little worlds and things like that. And I don't think that'll stop. I think it's more just if you think about it on a jurisdictional level, and language I think is the building block of society.
Yeah.
The thing is, everyone needs to be able to talk to each other.
Yeah.
I think more than anything else, that causes problems in the world. The inability for us to see someone who looks weird and talks different and understand what the hell they're saying.
Yeah.
I think that causes more problems than most other things.
Yeah. So your opinion, the cost benefit.
Look, that's like I think any language, whatever it is, it's probably going to become uniform.
Yeah.
Or at least there'll be a common tongue that people can speak, and then maybe we'll have other ones. Like you could, there's no problem with you going off and learning another tongue as well, and you can talk it to all your friends, whatever it is. There's no problem with that. You're not going to make other languages illegal. It's just that you would have to have something that everyone could talk to each other with, and that's what happens as societies grow. That's what. Like the whole sections of America, I think there's still like the Amish society and stuff that still speak their own German version, but as they become more connected with the rest of America through necessity, they've had to learn English as well. So they speak both. Like, that's just what happens to cultures as they develop. They become more homogenous, but then they form their own other differences. Anyway, we'll keep going because there's so many points to get through. So the second one is to do with military budgets and development. This is actually something that I've thought for a while, which is basically because the military is it forms a lot of different roles as an institution. It's a big equalizer for society because historically militaries always, you could join them and do whatever job you wanted to do with them. You serve for a minimum amount of time, and for that minimum amount of time you have to do something that's useful to the country, and you get to know all the other people, you talk to them, you spend time with them from all these different walks of life, and then you leave and you go do that professionally. That way you don't have to fund some university course yourself. You don't have to, do something really difficult and expensive that a private company has to cover to get yourself taught to do something. Mm-hmm. And so what you ended up with is a lot of people have gone in to become engineers and like nurses and doctors and all these other auxiliary professions, as well as obviously being in the combat front line. And they get taught how to do them, and then they do them for the military, and then they leave and go and work for private companies that don't have to pay to train them. Mm-hmm. So the thing is, what you end up with, if you have a world, right, where you have like the entire planet, obviously the idea is we don't really have a military per se anymore because we don't have anyone to fight. But the thing is, what you have is security services.
Yeah, so like there's always going to be rebellions. There's always going to be someone who wants their freedom, and then...
Yeah.
Yeah, you roll in there with the military or... Yeah,
I mean, the thing is, what you have is what the National Guard does in America. Yeah. So the idea of the National Guard is it's basically volunteers who join up and become part of this volunteer organization, which is sort of the same as the reserves here. Mm-hmm. But the idea of the National Guard is it is deployed domestically, mm-hmm. whereas the full-time military is deployed internationally.
Right.
So what you would have is like a global National Guard where people would volunteer to do like service or whatever it is. And the thing is, you could join, conceptually, you would have something like this, you could keep all the military budgets, but you'd use it as a development organization.
Yeah.
Because like when they deploy...
Which is kind of a lot of
exactly.
Australian military's work
It's what a lot of them... I mean, like the biggest recipient of US aid for the last 5 years is Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, the Americans go there and they're just trying to build the entire country up so they can finally leave.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's a random success, but it's in some degrees, but it's not really worked out the way they wanted. But the thing is that that's part of the problem of having separate countries as well. Like there's no long-term commitment. It's as soon as we fix it, we're leaving, and the Taliban know that, so they're just going to hide until they leave.
Yeah, right.
And that's what they tell them all the time. That's what the villagers tell. They go into these villages. This is actually a great example because the thing is, these soldiers go into these villages and they will talk to the elders there, and they'll have the big meeting, the shuras, and then they'll sit down with them and say, what can we do? Like, we have all this money, we have all this resources, what can we do to make this town better so you, like, feel more part of the rest of Afghanistan? Because obviously they're in the rural parts where it's sort of disconnected. And they're like, well, this and this and this and this. But then, like, if they really crack through to the back, it's like... I'm meeting you because you're the guys here with guns at the moment. Mm. As soon as you leave at night, the Taliban come and we do this again with them because if we say no to them, they'll shoot us.
Yeah.
And like they're kind of afraid the Americans might do the same thing.
Yeah.
So they're just sort of like trying to play everyone until like to make sure the village is okay.
Yeah.
They're basically caught between two people with way more guns than they have. And the thing is, this is kind of what development ends up being when you're dealing between an insurgency and a development organization. Mm-hmm. But if you're there permanently, if it's like, we're never leaving, right? We are never ever leaving, and we've got an enormous amount of resources to commit to fixing this. And not only that, you're fixing it from every direction. It's not like Because again, the problem in Afghanistan is the insurgents can go over to the rural section of Pakistan and just hide.
Yeah.
And then as soon as the Americans pull away, they can come back. The national border problem creates so many issues that we can't deal with. But if you were dealing with that from every direction at once, you could fix the problem. Essentially, you just need to bring infrastructure and everything else. But these organizations, if you committed a massive amount of the national budget to the military budgets you have now, right?
Yeah.
You commit them to being a development force, and you hire people from everywhere, right? You can imagine grabbing people from Kenya and India and Uzbekistan and whatever it is, and chucking them into the same boot camp, but then maybe they have to go through a language course first or something so everyone can talk to each other. That could be part of it. I mean, how many people would sign up for that in poorer parts of the world?
Yeah.
And then you would teach them how to speak the common language so they could communicate with people. The thing is, they'd be taught these skills so they could then go out and develop the world and whatever else. The things that they could never afford to learn on their own.
Feels very colonial.
It is. No. I mean, but it is. The thing is,
you're going to end up with a system where the people from the richer nations, so your Americans, your British, are going into impoverished nations and rounding up all the young men, and it's all the white people in charge.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I think at the beginning you'd have to do it really tactfully, because the thing is, the Americans that join the military would have to go to the exact same boot camp. They'd have to go to the exact same schools. Everything would be shared, and this is actually what happened in you have a lot of countries where Scotland is massively out, proportion to in the UK military, proportion to population, the Scottish are way overrepresented.
Okay.
Because the average level of income in Scotland is considerably lower. Well, that's the conjecture.
Yeah.
Is that people from low income households see the military as a really good option.
Yeah.
Because they can go there and they can get taught something. They spend a certain amount of time there and then they leave, and then they can go and do it privately.
Yeah.
Or they can get just a career and stay in the military.
Yeah.
But the thing is that, I mean, obviously, you end up with a bit of at the beginning, you could easily imagine that. You could easily imagine a bunch of rich, white military people or private contractors or something just turning up in a village and going, yeah, I'll take the big, strong one. And it's it's fucking ridiculous. But the thing is, what you'd end up with is you'd have recruitment stations throughout the developed world or whatever it is, and it would do a few things. It would, one, you'd be able to deploy an enormous number of people. You would not have a recruitment problem.
Yeah.
You would be able to deploy an enormous number of people to areas that need development, and they'd be able to build it up in unsafe areas, but you don't want to send contractors into.
Would you be inviting a coup?
From what?
If it's the situation of one American rolling into the village, and giving guns. Coming in and saying, we're in charge now, here are some guns. No. So, you think about what it's like to join the military now, right? You go to a recruitment station, and the thing is, you then get signed up to get shipped or flown to a training center. Yeah.
You might have, 3 in the world or something. You might have these massive complexes for training the next generation of people. And the thing is, you'd fly them there, or you'd drive them there, or you'd train them there, or whatever it is. There'd be a way to get everyone to the centers, as there is with the way militaries work now. Because, I'm talking from my own experience when I went to boot camp, the thing is, it's you go, you train, and the thing is, then everyone gets chucked on buses and they're driven to the thing.
It's quite an equalizer.
And then everyone is treated exactly the same. That's why that's that line from Full Metal Jacket. It's I don't care if you're black, white, green, yellow, no, yellow, something else, caramel or something, is that all I see is green. And it's the idea, and you're all pieces of shit, or something like that. It's just that. It's that point. It's the fact that that's why it's been such a thing. Because one of the things it's proven to do is basically it massively uplifts people in poorer situations.
Yeah.
By training them how to do these things they could never afford to do, never have the opportunity to go to school doing. And it creates a national identity.
Yeah. Because
everyone that goes there remembers the 10 years or whatever it is they spent training and then doing this job and doing this common goal. Yeah. And then they go back to their houses or they move wherever they're going to move. And I think that end part would be amazing.
Yeah.
You think of the world we have now, and then you think of a world where everyone spent 10 years, not everyone, but a massive proportion of people have spent 10 years training and working and living together and working on a common problem, which is basically development of the world. Because there's all huge sections you couldn't pay contractors to do because it's just inefficient. But you'd send in a military sort of organization with a development organization, and they'll build all the roads, they'll protect the roads, they'll do everything because it's like a combined military/development thing. And then at the end, you have a huge number of trained engineers and trained everything, and you have developed sections of the world because it's like there's always going to be more people that will come in and protect these. We're never leaving. Apparently that is one of the biggest things in Afghanistan, was just the fact that they knew 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is, they're going to leave. And the Taliban will come back. And that's exactly what happens. Anyway, so that's my conception of the military, is kind of like as its traditional role of equalizer, where everyone can go to the same place, do the same thing, and you're treating every human being from every background equally once they turn up. So they could be from the richest part of New York or the poorest part of Uzbekistan, and the thing is, they all turn up in that training center, and there's some drill sergeant telling them they all suck. And the thing is, and then they all have to rely on each other to succeed. And I've been there. I've been in that situation, and I can tell you, like, there's kids from rural Queensland and all this stuff, and didn't really have much in common with them. But the drill sergeant hated all of us equally. So the thing is, it was a unifying experience. It absolutely was. I actually became really good friends with them while I was there. And it was like, outside, I don't know what we would have had in common, honestly, because we followed completely different things, but we're all getting yelled at, and we're all cold, and we're all uncomfortable, and they had those hats digging into our heads. Like, it was just, that's how I see it anyway. But but you make a good point. You need to handle it a certain way. Because as much as it can be positive, it could also just be very destructive. Anyway, so I that was a big rant by me. But the thing is, I have a lot of thoughts about the military thing, that like the way that it's used and what it's done historically for different countries. And then by eliminating the need for national competition, workplace decisions and priorities could be set by a requirement of the worker rather than the need to compete. So the thing is, if a country has absolute dominance over a market because it has the only source of a resource, or it has the only thing of a thing, it has all the sway in the world, it doesn't need to worry about competing, for instance. And what it can do is it can say, and these are all mandated. We want to have health insurance for all the workers. We want to have this, we want to have this, we want to have this. We can make all these decisions, have good tax rates that actually fund the state and everything else.
That people actually pay.
And you actually have the weight to actually make it happen. Because you say, you can't go anywhere else.
That's if you've got currently companies hiding in, was it Ireland has got really lax taxing.
Ireland is kind of really bad for it. I think Apple paid 0.01% of like tax on their profits from iTunes for like 2012 and 2013. And like, so of like billions and billions, they paid some tiny amount because they were bouncing it between the countries. But like, because the fundamental problem is that every country is constantly incentivized all the time to undercut the country next to them. Because they're all trying to attract business. They're all trying to attract wealth. Because when you have business and wealth in your country, you have the jobs, you have the money from the wealth, you have, the prestige it brings, you have like strategic control because of it. Like, you have everything if you have the money in your country.
But if we're going to allow countries to operate as states and have some of their own laws, then the taxing problem won't be fixed.
Well, you'd have federal taxes.
Because I'm just thinking, I know, what city is it in America where it's on the border? Is it Kansas City? Half it's in Kansas and half of it's Missouri.
I don't know.
There's some major city in the US that sits right on the border between two states, and those two states are constantly, again, battling to undercut taxes to get the businesses to move from one side of the road to the other, because obviously it's very easy for them to move if they only have to move down the road. So Yeah, I guess it's just finding a way to have, I guess, certain areas of the law would be.
Yeah, like the thing is, it's kind of like in Australia, you have the federal tax system, and you have basically states will impose things sometimes, but fundamentally you still have the federal tax system that is the baseline. Yeah. So the thing is, a state might say, I'm going to put this on as well, and sort of hurt themselves in the process, maybe. But the thing is, the federal level is the base level, and that has to be what makes sense.
Yeah.
So the thing is, because at the moment you have, like, Ireland is massively incentivized because the thing is, the EU, like I said, is not a complete state.
Yeah.
It's like a mishmash, so they can kind of do what they want within it, and they still have the EU common market. So if you're in the EU common market, and this is what they're doing when they're recruiting the Eastern European countries, they're like, alright, you're coming in, but you absolutely can't do this. Because everyone's like, if you start undercutting everyone else in the EU market, it's going to ruin the whole thing, kind of thing. So, like, it's always a temptation. So even if you united the entire planet, right? You united the entire planet except one country, and that one last country said, yeah, but I'm gonna make low taxes.
Yeah.
Because the rest of the world is united and it has a good tax rate that funds everything. I'm gonna set mine at 10%. And then all the businesses just into that one little thing. That's why there's some obscene number of countries registered in the Bahamas and the Canary Islands and all that kind of stuff, because like by doing that they avoid all the taxation obligations and all the rules. Like you know, to be registered as a business in this country, you need to obey these air, like you can't pollute the air, you can't do this, you can't do that. That's like EU regulations.
Yeah.
But then a poorer country that has nothing, right? It has no resources, no anything. It's like, I need to attract business somehow. All right, I'm just going to cut all the benefits from my laws and just make the minimum wage nothing.
Yeah.
And then, so then everyone's like, then we'll move your business there because we can spend $5 to make a product that costs $1,000 or something.
Yeah.
That competition constantly undercuts countries that are trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, and I guess that comes down to free migration and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because if you've got free migration, again, that doesn't really work if this country is saying that they're not part of the union. But if you've got free migration, okay, so you make the minimum wage zero.
Yeah.
All the businesses go there.
Yeah.
None of the workers want to go there.
Yeah.
So then it collapses. So
yeah.
As long as you're free to move out of those places.
Yeah, I mean, the perfect example is automation. Because the thing is, the perfect country, like, a perfect country for capitalist economies is a country where basically you have one guy who runs the whole thing. Even maybe there's no one there. There's no people except business owners. And all the production is done by robots that can make everything at 1 cent.
Yeah.
Sort of thing, because it costs virtually nothing to make anything. Then they sell everything overseas, and everyone else basically just has to buy their products. And then you have countries like America where it's like, if they try to demand a certain level of, benefits and workers' rights and labor conditions and all that kind of stuff, okay, that's going to cost me $50 a unit, whereas I can go to Robo City over here and make things for 1 cent a unit. Like, why would I go to yours and then pay 5% taxes?
Yeah.
It's like, capitalist enterprise is about creating efficiency in production.
Yeah. And
sometimes that correlates with better things for the workers if the workers have leeway, whatever it's called, bargaining power. But when they don't, because everything's a robot and everything's really cheap and you can just go over there and there's no problems, it's like you have no leeway, you have no bargaining power.
Yeah.
And so capitalist theory dictates that they're going to go do the cheapest thing possible to make the maximum amount of value. And historically, when you had isolated economies and everything had to be done by hand, that meant great things for the workers.
Yeah.
When you have automation and you don't have isolated economies, it means terrible things for the working people. Yeah.
And I've always thought that it's really a shame, the competitive nature of humans.
Yeah.
Because, like, people talk about cutting down the work week and going for a UBI and just universal basic income. And I don't think it's too difficult to imagine a point where people don't really need to work for a society to feed and house everybody.
Yeah.
But, like, if I work 20 hours a week, you're going to work 30 hours a week so that you then have power over me because you have a bit more money.
Yeah.
Like, even though it's completely unnecessary for our survival, it's always going to... It's very difficult to tone down the culture when you're in a capitalist.
And that's why we enshrine workaholics and things like that. it's become a real, like,
it's
being a
crazy.
workaholic and having all this stuff going on has become, like...
Join the hustle, Daniel.
You're really cool.
Everyone
like,
loves to hustle.
Oh, it's like, as someone who works in a corporate finance institution, like, you see it everywhere. It's definitely, like, I see it, like, there's a lot of successful people there, so the thing is, like, a lot of them work a lot.
Yes.
So the thing is, I don't work that much, but a lot of people do.
I get it in waves being at business school where I'm like, I get into that and I'm like, yeah, okay, I can maximize efficiency. Oh, you can do all these things. I want to be constantly in training and constantly looking for a side hustle, blah, blah, blah. And then it just gets to a point and I'm like, why the fuck am I thinking like this? I'm just going to sit on the couch and pat my cat.
Yeah.
Because that makes me happy.
Yeah.
What is the point of life if not to make yourself and others happy?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And the thing is, like, I think you have, see, the funny thing for me is the Americans enshrine the 1950s, right? Because it was like a boom. Like, it was the best period in terms of average income and everything else. Like, all you had to do was be willing to do a job, and you could find one and get paid well. Yeah. Like, the standard was very low, and they love the 1950s. They love talking about it, but the 1950s was one, is when they were very isolated economically. The rest of the world was pretty much destroyed by World War II. But they were also probably the most socialist they've ever been. Was in the 50s, because Roosevelt after World War II had left all this stuff in place from World War II, and basically had all these protections. The New Deal was still sort of kicking, and like, what was the New Deal? It was something else. I can't remember if the New Deal was someone else. I think I'm getting confused. But like the tax rates were enormous. Like, university was getting subsidized and paid for, people were getting trained, stuff was getting spent back into the economy, they were building infrastructure. It was him. Yeah, the New Deal was him. I was trying to get confused. There's something else by Lyndon Johnson. Oh no, Great Society was Lyndon Johnson. He put in the New Deal, and it was like, there was unions everywhere. Like, the unionization was massively supported by the government. Like, it was encouraged. And basically, the workers had enormous amounts of bargaining power, partially because of the unions, partially because of the economy. And they had this, like, they almost had the microcosm of what I'd imagine the world could potentially be like, where they didn't have to worry about competition. They basically made everything for themselves. They weren't getting massive amounts of imports or anything at the time. They were getting money from exports, so that's probably the one thing that kind of throws it off. But the thing is, American steelworkers, as in the book I'm reading at the moment, in the Mon Valley, there's this massive thing, this Pittsburgh steel plant, which was basically supplying steel to massive sections of eastern coast of America and all those sort of areas. And tons of money coming in because of it, because they were the steel manufacturer. But then at some point, they, in like the 60s, I think it is, they figured out a way to get into into Hudson Bay or whatever it is, the northern thing. I think it was Hudson Bay. But basically, then all of a sudden all this European steel started coming over, being made cheaper. And the cost of everything dropped, and so then they weren't competitive anymore, and they were having to compete with like a half-destroyed country over the world that didn't pay their people as much. Yeah. So European steel was undercutting them. And it's about that point that they start to get exposed to the outside market again. Mm-hmm. But you had this period in the 50s where they were basically experiencing what global society could be like, where there's no outside competition. The government sets all the rules. Basically, the government says these things are all mandated. Everyone should be in unions. You know, university can be this and this and this. They're efficiently collecting taxes because people aren't spending it anywhere else. Yeah. Because there's nowhere else to spend it.
So what's your view then on how, like, trade tariffs and growing isolationism in the US, is that a different story, or do you think that is going to help the economy?
It can be good. The thing is, because what it does is it means that America gets to kind of obey its own economic rules. Right. And sort of set its own thing. Because the big problem is the fact that China is classed as a developing country. Yeah. And the thing is, so it gets all these trade concessions.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
From the World Trade Organization. I think it's the World Trade Organization does that. But basically, if your class is developing, You don't have to do all these things and obey all these extra rules kind of things that a developed country has to obey. But because China kind of is and isn't, they keep, like, doing whatever they can to maintain their status as developing because it gives them an edge.
That's a weird incentive.
And so they're trying not to become classed as developed so that they keep being the cheap place to build everything so that they can keep... And so, like, it really... I hadn't heard about that. It massively offsets the trade balance between the two of them because America obviously is classed as developed. They have to do all this stuff that China doesn't have to do. And at the same time, China puts a lot of tariffs on foreign created items, like massive ones. Apparently, like... Ford cars, for instance, a Ford car that would cost $18,000 in America, I think this was in a couple of books ago I read, cost like $18,000, I'll reference it in the description, I'll find it again. It's like $18,000 in America, and if you bought the same car in China after it was imported and it had the Chinese tariffs, it would cost $60,000. Like, they were making sure no one was buying anything from outside of China, as well as making sure no one outside of China was buying anything except from China. So the thing is, like, they're manipulating a national trade system that again wouldn't exist if there wasn't multiple countries, because you'd have one labor market, one set of rules, one set of economy. Like, you kind of you get rid of that entire problem. Because
I guess as long as you're doing it slowly, because I was about to say, you know, if you go into a region where people are getting paid 20 cents a day and so you
absolutely.
go, alright, this one company's going to pay you, that's obviously stupid, but if you do it slowly...
I'm never going to make the argument that you can do this overnight. It's more about thinking about where it could get to and saying, that makes sense.
How do we get there
that
safely?
Functions. How do I backstep until something makes sense? Sort of thing.
Well, we did sort of the opposite thing in Australia with the car tax, because we could import cars when we were building our own, and then our market got flooded and it no longer became a viable option to design and make our own cars. That's why it's... I
mean, that's the problem when you have different economies, is they'll make them at different costs. And then the thing is, suddenly, and again, according to capitalist theory, you're going to get the cheapest thing and then people will buy more of that thing. But the problem is you can't really control that money's going to stay here. The problem is if you're buying lots of cars because they're the cheapest thing and you sell them, the money might large part go overseas. And that's the other problem that you have with rich people especially, and rich companies, is, so I mean, imagine $1, right? You get $1, that dollar is almost certainly entirely going to get spent within Australian economy, right? You're like a regular person, you give them $1, it's going to stay here almost entirely. And
it's going to go back into the economy
and
circulate. So
if you give it to a company that has an obscene amount of money already, and it goes to the owners that have an obscene amount of money, and that company doesn't really get taxed. So you take News Corporation, for instance. The thing is, doesn't really get taxed at all. Like, I don't think it actually got taxed for like the last 10 years. So the thing is, you have people like Rupert Murdoch and stuff at the top, of people like him. He's very active overseas because the economy is very globalized and it's very transnational. And so the thing is, they will spend money in all these other countries, right? Like, you pay for Foxtel, your Foxtel payment, I don't know what the percentage is, but I'd imagine the way that it funnels up to the top and then disperses out into the rest of the News Corp, it probably is some tiny percentage actually stays within the Australian economy and gets taxed effectively.
And I think that what I've heard as well is if you're making more profit for people who are already very rich, they don't tend to spend it, so it just...
No, that's the other thing, is like, oh, well,
I've
bought the houses I want, so I may as well just put the rest of it in savings, or I put it into a tax haven, or whatever it is.
Some kind of investment where it's not...
Something where it's just going to sit there and make more money, and that's the problem that you get when wealth accumulates at the top, is it just more and more sits in places it's not being spent on anything, whereas anything we make, all the three of us, is gonna probably pay for something somewhere in Australia, and that's how the global economy would work too. Is because the rich people, even if they had moved their money wherever, they bought an apartment in New York, they'd invested it over there, they'd done whatever, it's still the same economy. Like, it's not going anywhere. It's still feeding the same thing. You can still open a business in that part of the world because it's all the same country. Alright, so then we have tax evasion elimination, which is basically sort of what we were just talking about, would provide a huge amount of uptake on state revenue, because basically you can't hide your money anywhere. You have one economy with one set of rules and one set of taxes. you can't play that game that Apple played with Ireland and the EU. You can't move your money to Singapore where you got a 18% tax rate or whatever it is, or Russia, which has like a 15% one, like it's really low. Because so I got the number here. It was a study by Peter Jansky that $500 billion are lost annually to tax evasion and avoidance. Because
That's
worldwide. Yeah, 500 billion worldwide. So double the USA budget for 5 years or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But that's just to tax evasion and avoidance. The thing is, I mean, how much of it, like you say, is just sitting in savings accounts as well? But the thing is, tax evasion and wealthy people, like with the Panama Papers that came out, where they revealed all these rich people and companies and countries that are just hiding all their money all over the world in shell companies and stuff like that. Because they're there, like if you're sitting there with $5 billion and you don't want to get it taxed, then because you're going to see half of it vanish, because $2.5 billion is a lot of money.
Yes.
It's like, I can get in contact with these people and spend maybe $5 million and I'll set up a thing through them, and then voila, my money's protected.
Such a human thing, that loss aversion too.
Yeah.
Because if you've got, what did you say, $50 million, the difference in lifestyle between having $50 million and $20 million is not much. Let's be honest.
I think honestly,
the lifestyle's pretty similar.
I think what it is they spend time with other people that have $50 million, that $50 billion, and the thing is, it's like, I don't want to be the guy that suddenly has half of that when all my friends don't. Like, it's you're living in a society where people have a certain amount. Like, you buy, like, that's...
Yeah.
Like, you have New York penthouses that go for $10 million and stuff like that, right? Like, where they're like, okay, so then suddenly you're thinking, I can only get 5 or something, I don't know, whatever it is.
Again, if you've got the difference between having 3 apartments and 4 apartments, like, it doesn't make any difference to your life.
No.
You can easily give that $25 million back to society.
No, absolutely.
And it's all in your head. It's all in the head.
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah. I think a big part of it just comes from the fact that a lot of other people aren't losing that money.
Yeah.
So everyone starts doing it because like if you spend all your time hanging out with other people who have that amount of money, and it's like, I'm the one guy I gave my $25 million to the government and everyone else didn't.
Yeah, you're such
it's like everyone's like, what's wrong with you, kind of thing. Like, and you, just by social convention, you'd stop doing it.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Is like, as long as there is a way, it's gonna become practice.
Yeah.
Like, as long as there's nothing to stop it happening, it's gonna keep happening. And the thing is, people keep hiding their money in other countries and other places. Apparently, it's a massive problem in the developing world because of all. Okay. I think I don't know, I think it was Images talking about this, but like, it was about the debt that they have in developing countries, basically, because they're in massive debt to the developed countries because they've given them development loans.
Yeah.
And so what very rich people do that own, like, whole sectors of the economy almost in all the developing countries do is they just take their money out.
Yeah.
And put it somewhere else to say it's not part of that massive repayment scheme kind of thing. So it's to get out of having to, like, concede a massive amount of it. They want to keep their money and be like kings of the country kind of thing.
That's why I like the concept of like a degradable currency.
Ooh.
A degradable currency.
Here's $20 million, but if you don't reinvest it into the economy, into the world, into more business practices, it's gone. And 5 years later, it's not spent, and the bank will be like, and it's gone.
That is a really interesting thought experiment.
So
like the impetus to... I mean, the thing is, I guess it would become the kind of thing, like, you know, how they set up charities? Yeah. Charities?
There's always going to be ways to do
like, I think it's, like, it's a great... I love the concept, actually, of making something where, like, it vanishes if you don't use it for something. I think, like... Yeah, I think that there's ways... There's a lot of ways I could imagine you could get around it by setting up like fake businesses and things like that.
Yeah, and even investments like this.
But that's a cool idea, definitely. Because I mean, that's the thing is like you need to drive reinvestment.
It's trickle down in that case. If you have that, like if you could somehow set that up, trickle-down economics might actually happen.
No, it would actually function. And that was the thing, is in the 50s that they keep lauding, the tax rate was so high that they wanted things to be tax deductible, because that's how they kept some of their money.
Yeah.
So they'd spend shit tons on making new businesses.
Yeah.
And that would get employment up.
Yeah.
And so the thing is, like, that's how you're meant to get around, like, taxation, especially at the higher income levels. Is that, like, you say, oh yeah, no, it's fair enough, deductible. You could deduct the whole thing as long as you spent the entire thing in the economy again, or whatever it is, on legitimate business expenses. In which case, not charging you tax is kind of okay, because you've spent all your money literally on other people. And no one's going to do that, but the thing is, like, that is a situation where you could end up in. But exactly. So it's a good point, but. The only way to get around it, the only way to avoid it, is by having a single economy, because you have one tax rate, and you can't hide your money anywhere. Thing is, people, what you also have to do is you have to work in laws that get rid of all the insane loopholes that allow people to kind of get around having to pay taxes. But a big part of the loopholes is the international system, because they say, oh no, my money's over there or over in that country or whatever it is, and it's being used for this, and I reported my income via a company in that country, and then it becomes this technically correct quagmire. Where, like, it's just everything's in all the right places at all the right rates that some accountant has spent 500,000 hours figuring out how to make, and now you can't tax it. And it's completely legal. And then that's actually the big problem of why they couldn't punish anyone after the GFC. Because nothing they did was illegal. Like, that's the thing, is, like, who should we punish for ruining the entire economy and gambling on it? Well, you didn't have any financial regulations in place, so there was no reason that they shouldn't. It's just... No, exactly. It's like, who should be culpable? It's probably the people that deregulated the financial industry, because... they got rid of the rules. So then basically there was no liquidity, the liquidity ratios were gone. So basically they didn't have to maintain a certain amount of cash, so they didn't have to pay things off. So they were leveraged like 8 times their actual value. So then when things came due and they couldn't pay them, you leveraged 8 times your value. You can't buy anything. You can't sell or buy anything. And then things collapse. So, like, that kind of, you need to iron out those loopholes at the same time. So I think the amount of capacity that Earth would have as a society to create a functioning economy, if you got rid of all the loopholes and got rid of the international inconsistencies, would be ridiculous. Like, the amount of money that would get fired straight back into the economy again would be exponentially ridiculous.
And it would I assume it would, protect against things like hyperinflation when countries start to fall apart.
Oh, right, yeah. So, I mean, like...
dollar.
Yeah, like, I mean, hyperinflation is when, they're printing currency to cover debts and things like that. Yeah. So then, like, things get really far away from them, or suddenly some bit of value in the country just suddenly vanishes, or whatever it is. Like, I know in Germany before World War II, the thing is they were just printing, like, they were putting more money out and everything, but obviously... Inflation is more, like, hyperinflation is more when something suddenly changes within the country.
Okay, right.
And you can't devalue the currency properly and all that kind of stuff. So, it hopefully that would actually not really be a problem so much. But who knows? Yeah. Someone with more experience with that kind of economics would need to explain to me whether or not that would be a massive problem or not.
Yeah, right.
I'm actually not completely sure. I actually should look that up. Anyway, we've gone on for, like, a very, very long time. This is part 1 of episode 4. We're now going to do cut this off, and we'll do part 2, and then we'll do part 2 as a separate episode, because there's a lot more here to talk about than I think we really expected.
Will the next episode be episode 5 or episode 4 part 2?
4 part 2.
Ooh.
The foreigning.
It is forthcoming.
Alright, I will talk to you all again soon.
See ya.